from disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds. My name is Christina Favretto. I'm head of special collections at the University of Miami in Miami, Florida, and I'll be moderating the discussion. This topic came about after some interesting discussions on how the concept of incorporating class and socioeconomic diversity into our ongoing effort to address diversity issues in our institutions. As a profession, we're doing much better at addressing the value of diversity in public and private spheres, as well as our daily lives. However, often the concept of socioeconomic class-based diversity is not addressed as vigorously as it could be. And this has resulted in a lopsided discussion sometimes, where we're not paying enough attention to students who are held back from pursuing careers or even further education because of their socioeconomic backgrounds. We're hoping that this is part of an ongoing discussion and that will also target issues present in our profession. Our speakers today are starting the discussion by talking about how they address these issues in their own institutions. I'd like to introduce them one at a time, and they'll be speaking. If you can hold your questions until the end, that will be great. You can type them in, of course, and we'll be addressing them on a first posed, first answered basis. Our first speaker is Annie Downey. She is an associate college librarian at Reed College. She's worked with Upward Bound, Summer Bridge, Winter Bridge, McNair Scholars, and veteran students. As a librarian from a low-income background, she believes the most important work with economically disadvantaged students happens in the classroom and at the reference desk. Ray Punn is the first-year student success librarian at Fresno State, the California State University. Ray works closely with SupportNet, at-risk student programs, Summer Bridge, and Upward Bound programs, and also partners with Student Affairs and the Career Development Center to foster new opportunities for students throughout the library. He supports first-year InfoLit programs and develops student engagement activities on campus. Most recently, he's the co-editor of the First Year Experience Cookbook, published by ACRL. Bob Schroeder is the Education Liaison Librarian at Portland State University and Urban Access University. Bob works with McNair Scholars and the Summer Bridge students, both of which focus on underrepresented groups in academia. Let's welcome our first speaker.
Thank you, Christina. Hi, everyone. I want to extend my thanks to the ULS coordinators for this program, Jason and Christina. I want to thank ACRL for supporting this. Alois, thank you for helping us coordinate this process. And I want to thank all of you for coming to this workshop or this webinar, excuse me, and hopefully all the ideas that you'll learn today will be able to inspire you to think broadly about the communities you serve, but the ones that you may not have considered or you may have not really focused on too much. So hopefully this will give you some key points. So I wanted to say, just reiterate a little bit, my background is that I'm the first-year student success librarian at Fresno State, and what that means is that I work closely with first-year students, international students, and transfer students in the areas of instruction, student engagement, assessment, and focusing on high impact practices, right? Like identifying key areas that we can embed student success and retention in curricular and extracurricular areas. And one interesting area is really looking at partnerships with the student affairs department. So in my role, I don't have a subject per se, like my other colleagues, maybe in education or in STEM. I work closely with all first-year students across the discipline, but the department I closely work with is student affairs, which I think for those of you who may not be aware of this, the student affairs department is actually where the bulk of student services happen, and I've seen that this is where the crux, or where the whole area of supporting students with different socioeconomic backgrounds can really happen and flourish with these kinds of partnerships that I will talk about today. So just in general, more closely about building relationships with students and developing new services. We're trying to create new programs and events. And the overall goal is obviously for student retention and success. So really learning about students and their different learning abilities and how they're using the library. And so I'll talk about some of that to develop accountability services for them and promoting new resources and empowering first-year students. That's the ultimate goal, giving them that opportunity, but through the lens of some of the other socioeconomic challenges I see that our students are facing. And to give you some context, Fresno State is one of the California state universities. So out of 23 campuses, it's one of the systems located in Central Valley, and we are a Hispanic serving institution and an Asian Pacific American Islander and Native American serving institution with about 25,000 enrollments. And it's really interesting because about 40 to 50%, I think I'm just estimating, there are first generation students. So that means that it's the first time going to college, and they are very unfamiliar with just using the library services, academic language, the norm, and many of them have probably never even used the library before in their high schools or growing up around Fresno or in the Central Valley. So to introduce library services is really critical because that's what a lot of their coursework will rely on for their own research, but also to acquire resources for their reading materials and so forth. And this, I wanted to bring just one example to give you an idea. So for those of you who didn't have this set up, this is a first-year student library advisory group I manage and then I set up. And it's basically inviting first-year students who would like to be part of this steering group to discuss their experiences as first-year students. And so what happens is I've selected a few first-year students. We meet once a month, and then we really discuss some of their challenges and some of their struggles using the library. And then there are a lot of things I hear that are really interesting that I will share about. This group is really a focus group for me, and a user experience group as well, thinking of ways how we enhance and promote our services differently, and then really developing key conversation points and activities to engage with the students. So I'll give you an example. These students right here, you see, this was in the past spring. They are all first generation Hmong students, and I was curious about like how they use the library and so forth. So we met once a month, and we've done some of these activities. And for instance, we've did an activity where they had to draw a map of the library, and they did their best. And there are no right or wrong images, but when they finished drawing it, some of them were really detailed and some of them were not. And what happens is that when they were not detailed, I suspect that they probably didn't use the library as much. And then I asked them, I'm curious, where do you study? And then they tell me, well, I don't really get a chance to study because I have 3 jobs. I don't have time to come to the library. So I often am not able to do well in the classes. Then we do, when we have a discussion about some of the online resources that they can access, and then I'm really figuring out their roles as students and as on campus and off campus. So they have a lot of responsibilities, and some of them they spend many time in the library. So this kind of activity will tell you a little bit about maybe their backgrounds and who they are for first year students or any other student you're interested in doing. But just like making sure that you have a group that meet consistently and having different kinds of activities and just asking questions and sharing resources and making sure that they're all aware what's going on and you're there to support them. And so I thought this was a really good opportunity. For incentives, there are some refreshments, but usually I think these students, I think I got 2 of them, and then they were able to get like 5 other students. They were basically pulled in from friends and so forth, so they just feel like committed. And then once the session is over, the whole like we meet once a month, they were able to put on their resume and talk to me about some of their other challenges, and then it became a really different kind of relationship. And I think because of this, able to build that trust in with the students and for them to share these information, and for me to share to them as ambassadors other resources that I'll talk about. So for instance, these are the other resources. Like they might not be familiar that we have an open education resource program. Another colleague of mine, Bang Bang, she is the coordinator for that. This is a new initiative that they've been trying to get faculty to adopt to OER. And in my role, I think I can also advocate with her and to meet some of our faculty, particularly those in the first year program, because I realize after talking to this group of students, they don't buy textbooks, many of them, and I don't know how they are able to survive through the classes, but they make it. And I hear more and more students are avoiding textbooks or they're sharing it, but there are other opportunities they can use, like interlibrary loan or course reserves. And so sharing that information and providing those kinds of resources, I think could be really helpful. And that's what I've been doing a lot in my instruction workshops. And I know this is something that most of you are probably doing, but also thinking about OER in general, how you can think about utilizing current resources, obviously in your library, promoting it with faculty. So there's like two different groups. There's the students and then there's the faculty. The faculty need to understand that students are struggling and they are uh, choosing to buy between among paying for rent, paying for groceries, or paying for the textbooks. I mean, these are the options and the realities that our students, at least at Fresno State, have to deal with day to day. And for us to be their advocate and bridging that to faculty, hopefully will be more helpful and engaging. And one other area is that the public library services is something I work closely with. And it's really interesting because in this partnership, I give these opportunities for all kinds of students and faculty, anyone interested. I bring them into the library and then they process library cards, they give out volunteering opportunities. This idea was just to build better collaborations and also sharing resources. They have some databases that we don't have, or if students feel like they need to go somewhere else to study that's closer to where they live, this is one option, so they know that they can actually go to the public library. But it also stemmed from the experience of our DREAM students, so undocumented students who may not have the opportunity to explore different areas of um, these kinds of agencies because they may not know that they can develop volunteering experiences to strengthen their own profile, because I know that they cannot get student work assistance if it's from a federal grant. But if it's from a special kind of program that provides funding, then they can get that support internally on campus. But most of the time, they're not aware that they can use this public library. And the fact that it's open for all is something to consider. I bring this up there because I think it's good to strengthen those kinds of partnerships. And I say this really broadly because I think a lot of the activities we tend to do, you may want to think about doing an environmental scan first. And these are just like different kinds of activities that I do, different kinds of partnerships, and hopefully they'll give you some ideas and inspirations to pick off and develop from there. So we have a food security project. This is actually on campus. That's not part of the library, but it's something that I'm working closely with. Hopefully down the line, having them providing extra support for students. It's open to all students in the library. We're working on that, but it's something that if your campus is working on, you may want to think about it because it's a good way to support students, because our library system, it opens much later than, let's say, a department outside of the library where it closes at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m., different hours and stuff, and the library is more visible, bringing in students together. One other key area is working closely with the Career Development Center, which is something that I really find fascinating because you can partner with them, help students empower their career and professional backgrounds, develop financial literacy, which I'm working with another colleague in promoting and really fostering so that our students are more aware of the resources, and we tie it all in with OER, ILL, all these other resources, and we mentioned there's also food security projects, if things like that that's going on campus. And of course, the ramifications of these students, they undergo a lot of stress, and there's a lot of challenges. So for my experience working with student affairs, that also includes health and wellness programs. So being certified in Project SAFE, which is really a QPR, question, persuade, and refer, where students might have a lot of, the students that I meet might have a lot of challenges that I might not be able to provide, but I might identify the symptoms and refer them to a counselor and really recommend them to speak to one. I think this kind of initiative that you're developing can really demonstrate the library's commitment to supporting the students, of course, with different socioeconomic backgrounds, but with also different kinds of needs that the library cannot provide, but can identify and always refer other resources. And just to sort of add on, you can obviously create LibGuides for these kinds of partnerships. We've had one for our Dream Success Center and Career Development Center, and then in those, there are some scholarships, really good information, and then they pass it along to their students that they meet more frequently. And so it's something that, it's an ongoing process. We get feedback from them, what to include, what to add, and things like that. And I'm sort of wrapping up, but I will say that for my own experience, I was a RDL scholar, which is the Institute of Research Design Librarianship in 2016. And from that experience, I had to develop a research project. And I was able to hire a student worker, actually, to help me code, transcribe, and discuss some of the research backgrounds and projects that I'm working on. And I noticed the student really needed a job, and then I was able to get funding. So I think as librarians, we are always working on projects, especially in the academic library, and we may be able to get funding. And we should think about students who could really benefit from this and how they can help us, but also really could be supportive to build their own resume and really develop the skills that they need. So this one student, he reached out to me after a workshop and said he was interested in being a librarian. And he was a first-year student, and then we discussed, what he was interested in, and we met regularly, and then that's when I was able to get the funding and have him organize some of the focus groups, get his friends together, attend some of the meetings and workshops I go to, so he can see what I do. So I think as librarians, we can demonstrate that level of professionalism, the opportunity for undergraduate students who might not know what to do after they graduate, but instill that kind of support. And so I leave it at that. This is just really broad, different kinds of activities, stuff I'm sure some of you are familiar with, and other things that might be a little new. And this is more of a practical aspect. I know Annie and Bob will have a lot of other really good ideas and theories behind their work. And so if you have any questions, happy to answer them at the end. So now I'm going to pass the ball to Annie. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. So it always takes me a second to reorient myself. So I want to thank everybody for attending and echo all of Ray's wonderful thanks to everybody. So what I would like to talk about today is casting a wide net to support low-income students. So to start, just a little bit about me. So I've been fortunate in that I have been able to work in a variety of academic library types. I've worked at a community college, a large public institution, and I currently work at a small, highly selective liberal arts college. And so as a librarian from a low-income background, connecting with low-income students has always been a part of my personal, professional passions. So I've done this in a variety of roles. I've been a reference librarian, outreach, instruction, and now I'm primarily an administrator. But shortly after I started working as a librarian, I began a PhD program in higher education, which informed my understanding of student success, retention, and pedagogy. And so that's a lot of what I want to talk about with you all today. And so this slide here is just to talk a little bit about the Leading Change Institute. So all of my work has culminated in my participation last summer in the 2016 Leading Change Institute. And the reason that I bring this up is because one of the things that we talked about a lot at the Leading Change Institute, and for those of you that aren't familiar with this, it helps librarians and IT professionals see and position themselves as leaders in their institutions. So putting ourselves out into the university or the college that we work in more widely. So our class motto was to cast a wide net. And this motto really resonates with me personally, but it's also the approach that I think is most successful in terms of libraries finding ways to meaningfully impact low-income students' lives. So Ray talked a little bit about the high-impact practices. And so high-impact practices are really important to familiarize yourself with. When we first started working on this presentation, I was going to talk a little bit more about some of the actual programs that I've worked on, but then as I saw what Ray and Bob were going to present on, I realized that we were talking about a lot of the same things, which really excited me. And I realized that we were working from the same research and theory base. So we work in very different institutions. I am familiar with both Ray and Bob's work, but I've never actually spoken to them or interacted with them. But somehow we were all three drawing from the same work. So I thought it was really important to pull that work out a little bit more. So I think something that we all have to be really aware of is that most low-income students are not going to wander in and figure out the best way to use their library, the library at your institution. When I started at the University of North Texas, where I later became a librarian at, when I started as an undergrad at UNT, I went into the library for the first time. I opened the door, I looked around, and I immediately turned around and walked right back out because I thought it was terrifying. And that is coming from somebody that, at that time, we did have librarians in our schools. I went to the public library every 2 weeks with my family. So I actually had a lot of reasons to feel comfortable in a library, which is very different from a lot of our low-income students. But I was still terrified to use that library because it was huge. I didn't know the rules. Everything had weird names. I remember when I walked in, the very first thing I saw was a big sign for abstracts and indexes. I had no idea what that was. So high-impact practices are really important because this is research that's already been done for us. And these are widely tested higher education practices that have been shown to significantly benefit college student success. So these practices impact all students, but they are especially high for students from historically underrepresented groups. So as Ray mentioned, he is working within these high-impact practices. So if in your library, if you're trying to figure out how to prioritize, which I always am because we have a relatively small staff, I'm always trying to figure out how do we prioritize, where do we put our focus, where do we put our attention, and starting with what research has shown to really work is a great place to go. So the first half of this list are basically practices that are structured around the first year. The second year has largely been ignored in higher education, and so it's starting to get a lot more of attention. So there's starting to be sophomore year experiences and that sort of thing. So that's a growing trend that you'll see more of. But these first 5, first-year experiences, common intellectual experiences, learning communities, writing intensive courses, and collaborative assignments and projects, these are really, you see these really in the first year right now in colleges and universities. So these are the projects and the programs to get involved with. And then the final 5 are things that you see primarily in the junior and senior years. So undergraduate research, diversity and global learning, service learning and community-based learning, internships, and capstone courses. And these are primarily meant to launch students. So the first half, they help to get students going, and they help with retention and help students to stay in college. And then the second half helps them to continue to grow once they're already there and then launches them in their career. So these are really important. Okay. So if one of the things that librarians say often is that we're not sure how we're going to be accepted if we try to put ourselves into these programs. So Ray talked about some great work that he has done with student affairs, and student affairs is a really great place to start. And another place to start is to go to the faculty side. So faculty have told us, or have told researchers, that institutional structures and policies outside of their control affect their ability to scale and sustain high-impact practices. And this is so true. So writing intensive courses, much of that falls to the faculty, whether that be adjunct or tenured faculty. Those writing intensive courses are really hard to deal with as a faculty member. They take a lot of time. So getting involved with those courses is something that faculty are often going to welcome. They also often don't have the time, resources, or connections to reach out to all the different partners. So just helping to expand those partnerships is something that's going to be welcomed by the faculty. Encouraging the student library connection in your high impact practices is something that we can do in a really meaningful way. One way that is kind of, to me, this is like the easiest fruit to grab. A large amount of the student work that is required for these high impact practices happen outside of the formal class environment. So one thing you can ask yourself is, does your library support that type of learning? Do students know that they can come and do that kind of learning in the library? Do they know how to reserve study rooms? Do they know that the library has resources for them? A significant proportion of students who withdraw from college use little to no library resources. So if we know that going in, then we already know how important it is to make this connection. And then I think this this particular quote was really eye-opening for me. So all of this stuff comes from a study that Murray did on academic libraries and high-impact practices for student retention. So what they did is they reached out to library deans and asked for their feedback on how their libraries were supporting these high-impact practices. And one of the things that they found is that 62% of the encouragement for academic libraries to participate in retention initiatives came from administrators external to the library. So this is where I go back to the Leading Change Institute idea of casting a wide net. We should be, if we want to position ourselves as leaders on our campuses, it is our responsibility to not wait for people to come to us and ask us to be involved. And I feel like this particular quote shows that we are still not doing as much as we need to do to embed ourselves out there in these programs. So we need to be paying attention to retention, and we need to be making sure that we are involved. So more points from the same study. Library deans and directors view library instruction as most involved with high impact practices. I identify primarily as an instruction librarian, so I think this is wonderful. But I think if you look at all of the high impact practices that are happening, instruction is not the only place that we should be putting ourselves. One thing that we can do by getting involved in in all of the high impact practices is it does tend to bring more instruction opportunities to the library, but it also brings a lot more one-on-one interactions. And one thing that is really important to keep in mind about students that are coming from low-income backgrounds is that they are often afraid of the grown-ups on campus. That's what the students at our college call us. They call us the grown-ups. I was mentoring a low-income student recently, and she told me that before she came to college, she had never met anybody with a PhD, and she was terrified to talk to any of her professors. And I said, well, I have a PhD, and you're not afraid to talk to me. And she said, I'm getting to where I'm not afraid of you. And that was after working together for 1.5 years. And for people that know me, I'm very nice, very approachable. So that was pretty eye-opening for me. Many libraries that report high alignment with high impact practices have a required information literacy component and a librarian liaison assigned to support it. So actually saying we are going to support this and putting resources into supporting this type of work is something that we have to do if we're really going to be meaningfully supporting students that come from a variety of backgrounds. So bringing this back a little bit to what I do, I strongly believe that our greatest power in libraries lies in our ability to connect with the communities that we serve in a very personal way. And so my two passions in librarianship are critical information literacy and service design, because these two approaches or methodologies help librarians work more closely to and in concert with the communities we serve. So I use critical information literacy for teaching and learning and service design for service creation, implementation, and assessment. And these things help me to connect with and understand students at a very personal level. So Bob is going to talk a lot more about critical information literacy, so I'm just going to point your attention to this definition and then move on to make sure that he has plenty of time. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about service design before I wrap up. So service design is a holistic, co-creative, and user-centered approach to understanding customer behavior for the creation or refining of services. And basically what this means is that with the service design methodology, we can get really close to students and really understand what they need. So when you're trying to figure out how to work with high-impact practices, if you're not even sure how to get started, then you could use some tools from service design, which Ray is already doing. So doing things like, I'm sorry, I looked at the question, I got distracted for a second. So doing things like having user working groups where you sit down with your students and you talk to them and you ask them, what are they having problems with? Maybe you do some customer journey mapping and try to get an understanding of when students walk into the door of your library for the first time, what do they think? Are they terrified? Is it a welcoming environment? So basically, I've used service design to try to get closer to the students and what they need. And so I thank you, and I'm going to pass the ball on to Bob. Uh-oh.
I think Christina has the ball.
Sorry, Bob.
Oh, well,
that's okay. You can bounce it my way.
The ball, but it is Bob's turn to speak, so I'm going to respectfully throw the ball in his direction.
Okay, while the ball is bouncing my way, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Bob Schroeder, and I'm the education librarian at Portland State University in Oregon. And I'm from a working class family in Metro Detroit, and I'm a first-generation college student, and I'm talking about working class in the library. And I think the ball should be heading my way. Well, maybe Christina can just make the next slide go. Can you hit the little forward button at the top? There you go. Thank you. All right, next slide, please. Portland State is an urban access university. That means there aren't nearly as many academic barriers, such as entrance exams, in order to attend PSU as there are for other colleges. But I have to acknowledge that there are many hidden barriers that affect students' chances of getting in and staying in PSU. Things like race, gender, citizenship, abilities, and the topic we're discussing today, socioeconomic status. I think we need to acknowledge that all of these characteristics intersect and play out differently, so it's hard to look at just one, in our case, socioeconomic status at a time. So keep in mind that working class isn't the same for Black or queer or immigrant or differently abled students. Thinking about Pierre Bourdieu's theory of social capital, I'd have to say I started off much richer because of my race, white, and my gender, male, than other working class students. But state schools like PSU and the ones I attended back in Michigan do seem to be a magnet for us. At PSU, like the other schools you've heard about today, we have various programs that support non-traditional students who come from groups traditionally underrepresented in higher ed. I've written about my involvement in these programs elsewhere, so I won't detail that. But being involved with the students in these programs has been one of the most enriching and satisfying relationships I've had in academia, one that has helped me unravel my own journey through the education system over the last almost 60 years. It's those relationships and what they've taught me that I wish to share today. I'm an instruction and reference librarian, so those relationships have been forged in classrooms, in student consultations, and at the reference desk. I want to focus on the internal and reflective work we can do that will help us create meaningful relationships with working class students. Habits of mind and habits of practice that help instill agency in working class students. There's a quote from an Aboriginal activist group in Queensland, Australia from the 1970s that I used in the paper I mentioned earlier, and that's really at the core of what I'm trying to talk about today. The quote goes, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting our time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." End quote. Critical pedagogues like Bell Hooks and Paulo Freire discuss this model and this relationship in their teaching. They offer to us that education is more than students gaining the tools for success in a profession. Though, of course, helping students to reach economic stability and success as they see it in their own terms is essential. We must validate those motives, but also realize that those motives exist in constant conflict and dance with other, more liberatory and transformative goals of education. One thing this mutual relationship means to me is that we try not to start our projects working with working class students with a deficit mindset. Certainly, many of these students may not have had many of the economic and academic privileges and advantages of other students, but they also have many different skills and advantages going for them. Hey, they did make it into our classrooms. We need to trust the wisdom in the classroom and enter into dialogue with these students from the very beginning, rather than helicoptering in and colonizing them with what we think might be useful. While we are certainly a resource in the classroom, we represent only one voice, and we need to constantly reflect and bring metacognition to bear on our actions and reactions in the classroom. We need to constantly ask ourselves, is what we are doing or proposing to do meeting the articulated needs of these students? Or are we acting in our own best interest and merely replicating the power structures that exist in the academy and in the world? So you're probably wondering, how do all of these big ideas really work in a classroom? Let me give you a few examples. When you meet with students to teach them about the library and academic research, do you come in with a tightly scripted lesson? Or do you also create a space for students to teach you what they need to know? I'm not saying that as librarians we don't all have expertise from what we've learned and our own lived experiences, and we certainly need to trust our own knowledge and position. But I'm suggesting that in order to keep current and really know the questions that are in the room, we need to invite students into dialogue. I definitely come to class prepared with ideas that I might discuss in class, but I also start many of my lessons with questions. I ask the students to talk with their neighbors or in groups about what they want to know more about today. Anything about using the library or its resources, about the research process in general, or any other thing about the university that they want to know more about. I give them 4 to 5 minutes, then I ask the group to tell me their questions, and I write them up on the board, letting the students know that this will be our lesson plan for the day. This is what we'll learn more about. I think this begins to set the tone that I'm valuing their input, and I'm modeling the idea that learning for both me and the students is a mutual and constructive thing. And truthfully, many of their questions are exactly what I had planned on talking about, though I find that they raise many new ones each term, and this is great. I'm really learning with them at the same time. As Freire says, we are both teacher-students and student-teachers. I make sure to validate their questions and comment when they have ones that I've never thought about. thanking them for teaching me more about the research needs of students. I think this method is especially helpful when working with traditionally underrepresented groups, such as working class students, and it really begins to validate for them in a public space that their questions are valid academic questions, that they should feel empowered to ask them, and they should expect to get answers. I've also done similar modifications to the traditional library tour. Excuse me. If you're like me, you mostly cringe when you're asked to provide one of these tours for students, but maybe it's just me, but the students I've taken on tours look like they want to be anywhere else but trapped in a library with someone who can talk incessantly about the glories of microfiche in the map room. So I created a student-led library tour where basically I prompt the students to go out to a different floor of the library and take photos of anything that they think might be helpful with their research or things that they find strange or weird, and email me the photos. When the students return to the classroom, I pull up their photos and I have them talk about what they found interesting or strange, and I chime in too. This method also validates their points of view and interests and sets us up into another creative and dialogic learning space. Having at least in part one of these critical lenses can be important when working with working class students. By critical lenses, I mean some understanding of class or gender or race or diverse abilities that comes from perspectives like Marxism, queer theory, feminist theory, or critical race theory. I'm not saying one must accept a critical stance personally, but I think we need to understand them as valid ways of knowing, just like other ways of knowing in the academy, in order to serve all of our students. This can be important for a variety of reasons. One is that these theories support asking critical questions in the classroom, questions about power. Questions like, why do we privilege peer-reviewed articles in school? Who benefits from paywalls and who doesn't? Who gets to make up the subject headings to describe other people? Why doesn't academic writing sound like how I talk? Why do textbooks cost so much? These are valid questions and ones that working class students will immediately get. If we don't support really hard questions in the classroom, then what are we modeling for our students? That there are questions, perhaps ones close to them, that they shouldn't ask in the university? Are we really saying our teaching is about social replication of inequalities rather than the possibility of transformation? The way we are and what we do in our classrooms around class ripples out into the university and the society at large. I have an example of how the fact that I have a critical lens supported a minority and working class student. I do individual consultations with students in my office if they have large involved research questions. I was consulting with a student who was a McNair scholar, showing her databases to use for her research. I can't remember exactly how we got onto the subject, but as we were talking, she was mentioning how she was noticing a change in her thinking and how she related to her family and friends since she'd been starting college. She was struggling with the idea of how becoming academic meant, for her, becoming something else, accepting values and ways of knowing and being that were different from a different class and from a white perspective. She wasn't very comfortable with being in this liminal space and was even mulling over the idea of moving to a different state in order not to feel like she was being pulled by these opposing cultural forces while she was in school. Understanding a bit about class and race, I was able to talk with her and help her find some research on this very subject that she was studying. Now, I'm not saying that just because you're a working class student, we should track you into a certain critical mode of research. Many working class students will have assignments and research that align more with traditional modes of inquiry. But sometimes students are researching a question that arises from their lived experience as working class and a question that really has critical nature. I think we would be doing students a disservice not to know and to not show them about these more interpretive ways of researching. As librarians who do reference and instruction work, we need to be cognizant of how much of the university is really a multiverse of different ways of being and doing, and that there are many disciplines that rely on feminist or queer or post-colonial theories, and that there are more flavors of research than just qualitative or quantitative methods. Things like participatory action research, autoethnography, or indigenous research. Knowing about these different theories and methods allows us to connect to many of our teaching faculty colleagues and their students who are already looking through critical lenses in their own classes. And most importantly, for working class students, whenever their questions revolve around issues of class, we will be in a position to support and validate them and their diverse and wonderful and needed research as also truly academic. With this deliberate support, we are helping to reinforce students' agency and the possibility of transformative education. Thank you.
Well, thanks to all the speakers. This is Christina again, and we've received a variety of really interesting questions. Sometimes these speakers were able to address them directly in the chat box, but I've grouped a couple together for our speakers to address. So for Ray Pun, one of the questions was, how do you recruit and select the students for your advisory board?
So it looks like Ray got kicked out of the panelist section, and he's now down in attendees.
Hey, Ray, how's it down there?
I could talk a little bit about how we select our people while we're waiting for Ray. Oh, no, Ray's back. Never mind.
Hi, sorry about that. I just wanted to say that for my own experience, just really briefly, that I work closely with a lot of the faculty, and then I've asked them to identify a couple of great students, and I also do a lot of workshops for Summer Bridge, EOP, which stands for Education Opportunity Program, and collaborations with Student Affairs, and then they've identified students for me that would benefit this kind of experience to learn more about the library through this kind of process. And then from there, I was able to talk to them and get their friends on board. So it's easier through word of mouth at that level if you're able to secure 2 or 3 folks and then just meet regularly, or just know that you are their liaison, their personal librarian, and the fact that you're accessible means a lot to them.
Okay, also for Ray, do you make an attempt, this is from Elizabeth Ponder, do you make an attempt with this group to have representation from all types of students? And she's thinking that on her campus, the students who would sign up would maybe give a skewed view of the student population.
That's a great point. I think my agenda for that past year, academic year, was focused on Hmong students. I was really curious about how they use the library. But the year before, I had diverse students, international student, a transfer student, several first-year students with different backgrounds. I obviously didn't do a thorough interview or survey with them. It's just I know for a fact that they have different experiences and so forth. So for the most part, I was more interested in their first-year experience, and then the backgrounds of how they use the library, when they use the library, where they use the library. That all started coming out during the focus group meeting.
Thanks, Ray. Liz Bellamy asks, do you have opportunities to speak with faculty about what you hear from students and acting sometimes as a mediator, especially in regard to OER, faculty seem to be largely unaware of students' lack of use of textbooks.
I do actually get a chance to speak with them. There's some meeting committees I've formed with some faculty in first-year program. But, my experience, and I'm just going to say this, I think many of us will agree, as a first-year experience librarian, first-year successor, and those lines, you work with first-year faculty who support first-year students. And guess who are those faculty? They're adjuncts. They're visiting lecturers. They're not usually permanent instructors. So they rotate constantly. Sometimes they're there in the spring, sometimes they're not there in the fall. They come back, they don't, they skip a year because of the way collective bargaining or how adjunct is kind of really complicated, and it's a revolving door. It's a challenge to get these groups of adjuncts who might buy in and really believe in it, and then the next time you have a whole bunch of new adjuncts, which is a great opportunity, but also there's no consistency. So there's that challenge I want to bring up. And the second challenge is that working with like coordinators is often key, or chair departments. But I think it is a challenge, and I work closely with another librarian I mentioned, and she advocates a lot on campus. And then for me to really remind her or recommend to her about first year too, and identifying through curriculum mapping and other approaches where we can meet with faculty and just bring it up that, for instance, like STEM, I also support first year STEM, talking to them that this is really expensive, these textbooks, and they're going to be buying more textbooks in the sciences later. So it's an ongoing conversation. Obviously, not the first attempt will work, but consistent building up that relationship.
Okay, thanks, Ray. Also, and this question was actually asked in a variety of different ways, but if students have 3 jobs, do you find that they're willing and able to go to additional programs like health and wellness programs? And if not, how can we make it a more fair kind of option for all of them?
That's a great question. I saw that a few times. I wanted to address it. For sure, I think they would go, and I also think they're not aware of it. It's really, they may have heard about it during orientation. Somebody must have told them once, but it doesn't sink in. So what we do is we have a lot of activities from our health and wellness in the libraries. For instance, we've done sort of like a therapy dog session or a video game night session, and there's always a representative from there to just like talk about their service too. I think it's important to collaborate and strengthen those relationships and continuously build visibility. Obviously, it's a challenge to promote constantly, but you have to really think the time of the need and referral. So I speak a lot to my colleagues to let them know that I work with health and wellness, and I've done these trainings and their upcoming workshops. I let them know, and then they can disseminate that information. It's a collective work. I think being an individual librarian just won't work that way. This is a collaborative team effort that everyone should really be thinking about.
Yeah, I'd like to just add in and reiterate what Ray is saying. I absolutely agree with that as well. I think that if you just have one person at your library doing this work, it's just not going to work. It has to be something that everybody that's working, at least in public services, is aware of, and aware that these are the practices that are happening on your campus. I mean, I think that if librarians are not staying clued in to the way that universities and colleges are teaching students and the things that they're doing to try to keep students there, then we're missing out on a lot of opportunities. And there are so many opportunities, and I think that that is an issue that sort of speaks to our students that have multiple jobs going to be willing to come to these programs. And I will say that for a lot of optional programs, they aren't going to be, which is why it's really important to get involved in the required programs, the programs that students have to come to. And I would also just simply say that for a lot of students that are coming from a background where they feel very uncomfortable and unfamiliar with the library, they really only have to connect with 1 or 2 people on the library staff 1 or 2 times to realize that this is a place that they can go and ask questions.
Here's a question for all 3 participants, and that is, who are your partners in these initiatives in the environment, in the academic environment, at your universities, at your institutions? Do you work with the folks in communications to get out information in the newsletter, with other faculty? Because it helps if there are a variety of stakeholders who understand your mission.
I'm just going to say I work mostly with instruction, so it's a lot of work with different programs and the different faculty. But I do want to say, you know, a lot of the great things that Annie and Ray were talking about, I mean, for example, we have a family-friendly study room, which only happened because we did some focus groups and some other librarians got involved and said, oh, you know, there's students that bring their children sometimes, and if we could have a room with toys and computers for the adults. We have 24/7 reference, which helps people that are working 3 jobs and they have to ask questions at 2 in the morning. A lot of these things that I'm talking about help everybody, but I think they help even more people that are socioeconomically disadvantaged. And the idea of, can you identify the large classes that you have that have very expensive textbooks, and can you get copies put into the library so that people can copy chapters here and there if they can't afford it? Those kinds of things are outside of what I do, but they're all done here at Portland State.
There have also been a couple of questions about faculty interest, faculty participation, and are faculty comfortable with some of these new ways of approaching student instruction within the libraries? And that's for anyone there.
So, so faculty have been involved with critical theory for much longer than librarians have. So faculty that are working in areas of humanities or social sciences, they should be well versed in what critical theory is. So if we start talking to students and asking questions about how to really think through this problem and how do you really, what the kinds of things that Bob was talking about paywalls and really understanding where information comes from, I feel that faculty want their students to understand the mechanics because they want them to be able to complete their paper, but they also want them to be learning and having higher level conversations. And so finding ways to have higher level conversations, in my experience, faculty welcome. The thing that you have to remember is that in addition to wanting to have those high level conversations, you do still have to get the things that they want to get, that they feel like their students need. You have to get them in there. But we can be more creative in how we get them in there.
Okay, and I see that it is 1 p.m. here on the East Coast, and we're out of time. This was definitely a lively discussion, and I think it should be a to-be-continued situation. Jason, did you want to add anything?
I just want to add that I pasted into the chat box a link to do a little assessment of this program. So if you take a few minutes and please complete that. Otherwise, thank you all for showing up, and thanks to Ray and Andy and Bob for an amazing presentation, and thank you, Christina.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.